Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Conversations with Vickie, where we are inspired to showcase the extraordinary stories of everyday people. Today, I have a very special guest who is going to be an absolutely, I think, exceptional conversation. It's going to be fascinating. We're going to talk all about our conscious, subconscious, dreamland, dream interpretation, and I don't know what else Chelsey has up her sleeves. So I am going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself, but I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself with my favorite question in the world, which is the first question I ask every single guest, which is, who are you?
I am Chelsey Turpening Coxsey. I'm pretty sure I'm a light bearer, and I've been doing some amazing things through my own personal journey, as well as bringing space for other people to also explore their journey. And I absolutely love it. So I'm a dream analysis coach, and I would not have ever thought I would have been a dream analysis coach, like younger, but oh my God, I freaking love it. And it is the coolest psychological and metaphysical experiences ever.
Oh my God, this is going to be amazing. Who doesn't want to better understand our dreams, right? So I'm going to give it to you to give us some, inner insights that we are not aware of. So help explain. Let's start with the very, very basics. Okay. Help us understand, what is a dream analysis coach? What is that?
Okay, so I created my own lane a little bit, which I realized there's a lot of Jungians and a lot of dream analysis out there, and they're usually therapists or psychologists. I approached it through my own experiences and kind of a soul calling, but I bring a lot of metaphysics to the table and my own experiences, and I'm a really great self-studier. So what I usually do when I'm in a dream sessions is I normally break dreams down into two categories, metaphysical and metaphorical. I kind of made those up myself because they rhyme and they match well, but they also explain it very kind of basically. Metaphorical is anything that is emotional or our own experiences and our own internal family system experiencing itself or relaying information back to us. Has a lot to do with our internal balance and finding wholeness within ourselves. But beyond humanity, after we find wholeness, there's usually a lot more beyond that. And I see that normally in dream analysis, it kind of bounces around in odd ways where you could be experiencing metaphorical and metaphysical at the same time in its own kind of progression, right? The second would be metaphysical, which is what it is, spiritual connection to something beyond us. It has a lot to do with the mass collective, connecting with the individual collective and bringing it to the mass collective. A lot of those dreams are quite different. So when I explore metaphysical dreams, they're quite different than when I would explore metaphorical dreams. Metaphorical dreams are very much Carl Jung based, getting into the personal symbolism and how that would reflect on our own emotional standpoint. But they're both very important, and they both have a different shoe walking forward into the soul purpose. So it gets very interesting. So I have been doing dream analysis for a good portion of 8 months now officially. I started with myself for a few years, and actually my dreams, curiously enough, doing dream analysis on myself, I did that during my awakening. So my dreams woke me up. It was getting so much to where I was someone who always noticed their dreams, but I was writing them down in a journal, focusing on them the best I could. But it wasn't until I hit a strong point of dealing with my masculine side, actually, in my dream phases, where I realized, who is this man in my dreams, and why does he keep harassing me, and why is everything going crazy? Where do I go from there? I'm a big fan of psychedelics. So for my personal experience, I did a little bit of a microdose to just really release all of that. And it came to this huge idea that the subconscious is not connected to the consciousness. And there's so much more to explore to humanity. And for me, that was not just my own personal discovery of oomph, but it was also later it evolved into how do I create this space for other people, which comes to a soul journey or soul work, soul purpose. So it was its own progression on its own. But there's so much going on in the human mind that when I was hallucinating, I was like, okay, just tell me what it is. Like, God, please just tell me. And when he did, he told me the imbalance of the subconscious and consciousness. I'm a big history fan. I started connecting dots, seeing how we had this issue for a majority of humanity, and our subconsciousness is beautiful. It is the artwork and poetry of our culture, of a world. It is our spiritual connection to God, and it also creates the religions around the world in various ways, but it all connects to a soul journey. And it's so symbolic that it's quite fascinating to explore. So when it came down to was, I really just wanted to ask God to let me know the secret, but to also help me have a space to share it and to teach it. Because I realize throughout history, there's always people in different fields and realms, and they're trying to speak it from their perspective. And at the end of the day, we are all speaking it from our perspective. And I just wanted to also be able to speak it from my own. And I truly feel the gift was given, because like the next day I was already writing, but I'm an author and I write creative writings kind of based off of my subconsciousness and my own shadow work. So before I did the coaching and creating the space for other people, I had my own space, and it kind of evolved from my own space to a larger space. Dream analysis is one of the most amazing things that I could see. It's a good space to dive into the subconsciousness, which we could do that through meditation. We could do it through a lot of different outlets, right? The subconsciousness is what it is. It's what lane are you going to explore it in? No matter what, it comes full circle and it will grasp you.
Well, 90% of our being is subconscious and only 10% is conscious, right? So
yes.
The pure majority is subconscious. But I have a very basic, we're going to start with the basics and then we're going to build.
That's fine.
Because I think it's important for us to understand the fundamentals and then like to bring the like weave in the more complex ideas. Yes, right. So talk to me a little bit about just like the fundamentals of dreaming. What is the science of why do we even dream? Why do humans have dreams? And you can explain it from both the metaphysical as well as the metaphorical lens. I think it would be really interesting. But if you also have like any background on the science of like, why do we dream? Like, why does the brain need to dream? And why is it that even though we're sleeping, the brain just keeps, or right, at least I think it's the brain that continues to move, right? And continues to show you things. So why do we dream?
Well, we dream for a lot of reasons. Our brain, first off, never shuts off until we're dead. So it's a thing that is always active. We have the same brain phases during the day as we do at night. A lot of people aren't holding consciousness through the night. So as you were saying, the consciousness is about 10%. When we start exploring our subconsciousness, you want to imagine that 10% goes to 20% or 30%, because the more we explore our subconscious, the more we bring more depthness to our consciousness. And that's huge, especially with like evolving and trying to hold more awareness as a human being or an individual, right? But not just with other people, but within ourselves too. I always say like people love spirituality, but a lot of people do the work for spirituality or the healing and the shadow work, but not a lot of people. Some people don't. So it's you have to listen to your subconsciousness, because eventually it does kind of build up a battle. So I've noticed why we dream has to do with our pineal gland, first off. And I love the pineal gland. I love Rick Strassman. So going off of just the mechanics of it would be the idea that the pineal gland actually works as an antenna. But it's not always exterior, it's also internal. So we've got the melatonin, the protein, and the DMT releases. That holds a lot, and like so many large scale. But going specifically to dreams, that is why we dream. And it gets a bit interesting because it does have to do with the DMT releases and the idea that it's producing consciousness still in the daytime. Yeah, I say when it gets to metaphysical.
And if I could just interrupt you there really quickly. So, and Joe Dispenza, he actually does meditations to activate your pineal gland, right? And so he talks about how important it is for us to activate it so that we can tap into our subconscious and reprogram the mind, reprogram the belief systems that we built up with it, right? Consciously. And so like that pineal gland, and I think that this is really interesting because people are, I feel like, just starting to kind of research the scientific aspect of the pineal gland. But I know that, from a spiritual lens, this has been something that has been looked at for a really long time and has been looked at, right, from like in terms of even like your breath work, how you can activate it. So I'm sorry. So that's like metaphorical, physical, scientific side of it.
There's so much going into it. That's
why interconnected, right? Like
it is.
Science, like even like as we explore like the science of the universe and how does it operate, and that it's a mental universe, right? And like all of the entanglement theory that is now like coming through, right? And like all of these scientists winning the Nobel Prize for the entanglement theory, and you're like, wait a minute, in spirituality,
this has been around forever.
That connection a really long time ago, like I here can affect you, like on the other side of the planet, you will feel my energy, right? So I find the connection between science and spirituality and that intersection actually quite fascinating. So I'm sorry. So please.
It's growing that way too, which is beautiful. And it needs to. So, and that gets on like a topic that I do express a lot of this in sessions, but it may be a little farther in the conversation, but it's the idea of the internal family system, how we take it on an individual level. But then when we look on a mass scale, something larger than us, we are still an internal family system, and we're just tiny little pieces of those internal parts. And when we start looking at it, it's never ending. It's the idea that we do lead to these larger aspects of consciousness and that we're all connected. So when it comes to dreams, we're definitely experiencing our personal experiences or emotional, but we're also experiencing the metaphysical. That's why I always break them into two categories, metaphorical and metaphysical. And it's always important to kind of know which one you're experiencing. And sometimes it's weird because you could have something that's very metaphorical to your internal system, but then months later, when you start getting into the metaphysical aspects a little deeper, you realize that even the metaphorical was still preparing you for your metaphysical experiences. They mirror each other quite well.
Can you give an example of that? Like, what would that be like? Can you make that like very real, contextual?
Okay, so I'm going to do a good example of this. And my client hasn't necessarily heard my full thoughts on this yet, but I do have an example from my client. But he's catching on to it, so I know he knows. Okay, so I have a client who's been with me for about 6 months, and I have watched him go from a whole bundle of dreams that fit a large, tiny puzzle pieces to a large picture of his internal family system. But when it came to his female aspect, she was quite metaphysical, because the feminine side in nature is usually more psychic, intuitional, creative. The feminine naturally holds these traits. So for him, she was kind of like not just in the shadow as he had the two wolves, right? So he had the silver wolf and the black wolf. But it wasn't just that his feminine nature was the black wolf. It was the feminine nature dug deep into the shadow, something that was neglected.
I'm sorry, can you explain the shadow? I know what you're referring to, but I'm not sure.
For others, yeah.
Yeah, can you explain what the shadow is?
Yeah, so the shadow will be parts of our subconsciousness that we're not aware of that is us. Sometimes they portray themselves as demons or something that's disconnected from ourselves, but they show themselves in various ways, and it's still a part of us in a deep psychology way. It is the idea that we have exiled parts of ourselves that our ego or our consciousness states refuse or manage. So they refuse to allow it, or they manage it to not come into the conscious daytime all the time. So in that sense, we're lacking.
And a lot of times there's that protector part that will just absolutely like deny its existence, or we'll
I call those the managers.
The managers, right? So because I've read into that a little bit. So, and Carl Jung was really kind of like the father of who was starting to look into like the whole integration, right? Like the persona. That's like the person that you are on the outside, and you're like, oh, like I portray myself this way, but then there's this like shadow part, right? This part that you
depthness.
You're right. The ego, like a lot of times it's referred to as the ego. This is the part that I don't want to see. This is the part that I don't want to be. This is the part that I'm shunning, ignoring, whatever, right? And what Carl Jung advocated was that actually the persona and the shadow, they need to integrate. And that's when you really become that whole self, is when you learn to love both the persona and what you were perceiving as the shadow or the bad, right? And when you love both and you can see that both are you and both is what integrates you, right? I don't know. That's like, at least from my readings, how I understood it.
No, that's perfect. It's the idea of transcending duality in basic terms. That when you transcend it within yourself and your own shadows, you can now start to understand on a large or mass scale and transcend it on even society. It really ends up changing belief systems a little bit.
Hugely. No, actually hugely. Because when you can start to see and also love those exile parts, I think that's when you can acquire peace with
Yes, it's true, because you don't have that internal battle going on, which is an internal battle if you are giving it the acknowledgement or not. When you have imbalanced parts, and I call them parts because it's part of the psychoanalyzing, I do break it down into parts when I do dream sessions. And I mean, some people say we or me. At the end of the day, I don't even care. We got a lot going on in there. And we do have the internal chatter, all the voices. So when you can get the voices to all connect and come together, that's huge. I call it bringing it to wholeness. So we each have different parts, and sometimes through trauma or bad experiences, they do get stuck into the different aspects, and we have to actually go back and bring it to wholeness, or the main self is what I call it. But going off of the client, though, in that example, he was having his feminine side that when we were first doing dream analysis, we were working on the inner child was obvious. The ego and the shadow side were obvious, and they both had their elements. They both had a need or want to come to surface. Like the ego had to take the shadow off the leash physically and allow it to have a platform. And it took several months of exploration and digging deep. But at the end of it, it was such a huge personal confirmation of the client that it was like he had this huge moment where he's like, I'm going to go in those water pods with the silence, and and he did one of those, and he had this huge euphoric moment where all his two shadow dogs and his intuition showed up in a trifecta, and it was just this complete balance of, okay, we did it, we made the first phase, right? But when we started going into the second phase, which was definitely getting metaphysical, like hardcore, and what it ended up being is a lot of things that had to do with his soul journey and his guides, but it also reflected his feminine state still needing to come out. And the feminine state is more of like the psychic abilities and the extra special abilities that he had denied himself. So it was something that when we had come to that conclusion, we were already 6 months in. But when we went back and looked at the previous dreams, we realized that even the symbolic internal family system dreams were still evolving with the concept of the feminine side. And she had been giving hints all along. Each part does that. The inner child will, your masculine or feminine side, depending on each person, what you're connecting to the most. The other will leave you little tips and hints to connect to it. Usually people only remember dreams in small amounts, and they'll focus on the small amount. When I do dream analysis, we're painting a very large picture, and we're gathering it up like puzzle pieces to build that picture. Sometimes it feels like a scavenger hunt. It's really interesting pulling out the patterns, but it's truly the most beautiful experience of like exploring your humanity. And I know people have these experiences doing other lanes too. I find my goal is hypnosis in the long run, but I think dreams are a really good place to start doing a lot of that work, and hypnosis would just take it a lot deeper. But really, there's so much going on. So that was a good example of how we were tracking his feminine state. But I always say that symbolism evolves with us. When you first have a dream, it will stand out in maybe that moment. Not always. Sometimes it's something you go, okay, let's see what plays out and comes, because it just doesn't make sense, right? And they usually always do. And well, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to lose my thought. I stopped for a second in my brain. It was something quite spectacular. And at the end of the day, we were able to look back on his previous ones and the symbolism was still evolving. So like, I know when people read spiritual scriptures or whatever their religion might be, the idea is every time you read your Bible or your scripture, it's supposed to evolve with you and show new lessons. Dreams do the same thing. That's why I love symbolism, because it really doesn't matter if it's on a mass collective or an individual, it still does the same thing, no matter what.
So if someone is interested in maybe pursuing dream analysis, like where do they start? Because I would venture to guess that the majority of people don't remember their dreams. I definitely don't remember. And it's funny because like I'll wake up remembering components of it, but like within the first hour, I will forget most of it. And there might be, if it was like really something very emotional, I will remember it throughout the day. But there are,
Yeah.
and what's interesting is that there are some people who like fully remember their dreams. And then there's me who just doesn't remember her dreams. And I remember like, as I was going through kind of my transformation, I read a lot about like people saying like, keep a journal by your bedside, write down your dreams just so that you can start to see like what's coming through for you. But like, I don't know, like I couldn't follow through that. So like, can you talk about like, why do we forget our dreams? But then also like, what can we do if we want to start to remember our dreams and to want to start to tap into that subconscious so that we can start to maybe glean more into our subconscious that we can't do while we're in the awake state?
Yeah. I always say it's like a muscle. It's something you train and work with. But at the same time, it's so simply done that like sometimes just setting the intention that you want to remember your dreams or say, hey, I'm going to start remembering my dreams. You tend to start remembering your dreams consciously. It's a bit odd, but like I had a client who said, well, I don't know a lot of my dreams or remember a lot of my dreams, but I want to try this because I had it going for free at the time. And he's like, well, I'm going to try this. And yeah, it's not an issue. Once you put your thought to remembering it, and it's not going to be every night. So I don't think people should get discouraged if they go a week without remembering their dreams. I go a week without remembering my dreams, and nor do I always care. You know, it's exhausting, especially when you have a busy life. It's nice to rest. And our brain is extremely active, even more so at night sometimes than it is during the day. Because during the day, we can tap in, tap out, zone out, right? But at night, it does it on autopilot automatically, if we're consciously aware of it or not. So like the consciousness works as a muscle. And another thing that's a good tip is I do encourage people who are trying to lucid dream or astral project or have more intention with their sleep to meditate while they're falling asleep, like lay in bed, just be comfortable, like you're gonna fall asleep, and just get in this mindset where you're meditating silently to yourself. I do encourage a lot of my clients at this point to work with their guides, which I know might be unfamiliar to a lot of people. And I've had people who have come to me who have been very active with their dreams for over 20 years. They never even thought to interact with their guides, knowing that they were there the whole time. So it's like funny because we all go through sleep paralysis and have some negative experiences sometimes, but we have muscle. It's just our free will needs to invite it in. So I get a lot going on with that, but I'm not trying to lose thought. My brain was like, so when I'm sorry, I have ADHD.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So we do train our brains and there's so much going on. So you can have the lucid states, you can have the astral states, or you can just have the zoning out and just trying to rest. There's no shame in not remembering your dreams. A lot of times with my clients, if they have a week where they're just not remembering it, that's fine. We have a lot more to talk about with the previous work or whatever's going on. I know that meditation in daytime is the same as sleep. So some people are better at meditating and having some of those experiences more so than when they're sleeping or remembering it at least. So
I have a question, a personal question. So my sister and I, right, our dad passed away about 20 years ago. And it's really interesting. She'll be like, oh, dad visits me in my dreams all the time. I always see him. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I've dreamt of him once or maybe twice since he passed away. And then she'll say the same thing about like this aunt that we were like extremely close to. And she'll be like, oh my God, she comes to me all the time. Right. And I'm like, what? Like, right. And I'm like, and you know, like I dream of like maybe like one or two of my uncles who have passed away, but she will like full on, she's like, oh, dad comes to me all the time. Like this aunt comes to me all the time. And I'm like, oh, they don't want to visit me. They never visit
You're like,
me.
why not me?
I know, right? And the funny part is like, I know I would remember if I would see them in my dreams.
Or something would trigger the memory of
Something
even,
would, for sure, like because they were just like such big persons in our lives, right? Like this one aunt we were super, super close to, and you know, so like, what is that? Like, what is that all about? Can you like shed some light on this? Like, do our ancestors come and visit us in our dreams? Why do they visit some and not the other members of the family, of the soul family? And yeah, like I'm just super, like on a personal level, I'm super curious.
Yeah, so that is very possible. I go off my own experiences. I've had a lot of visits as well, and family does visit. So if you think about it on astral realms, which I speak a lot in my sessions, I cannot avoid that because when people start waking up, they usually end up in the first and second realms, which are like the demons and a lot of the negative stuff. So we are 3D. The next realm above us would be the 4D, where ghosts exist, or a lot of, or could exist. They're not all there. Sometimes go to 5D into higher realms and become spirits, right? But either way, there is a level of consciousness that has some free will to explore. We're right in the middle of that, being a 3D. Like we have a lot of people experiences the shadows and the negatives. We have people experience the good of past loved ones and things like that. We got one over here and one over here on the round part. Yeah, dreams are a huge one. And like, I think because it's such an easy platform, it's the most used. So you probably have experienced your dad, or your dad is trying to experience you, and you're just a hard shell.
I genuinely don't think so. Like, and you know, like, and I love the way my sister's like, well, they come to me all the time. I see them all the time.
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny because my mom is the same as me. She's like, oh, I never see them in my dreams, or like sometimes, you know. So I'm going to talk about something interesting, and tell me if this is like for like if this is like you know, something that is we made up as a humanity, or if this is true. So there is a belief in some cultures that dreams can foretell your future, or they can warn you about something happening in your life. And, you know, like, so for example, someone in my family is about to have a baby. And of course, my sister, who's like, oh, I saw the baby. I saw the baby in my dream, and I know exactly what the baby is going to look like.
If she's right, tell me.
What? Or my mom will call me up and she's like, oh, I had this dream. Do not take the train into New York City because, like, you know. So what is that all about? Is this truth? Is this myth? Like, how do we think about all this stuff?
It could be a mix of both, depending on the person, each in the context, right? If someone's worried about travel, you might have paranoia dreams, right? But anticipating a baby, I could also see how that goes. But there's so much going on in a metaphorical and metaphysical concept that it's sometimes it's hard to tell, but it is possible. I had a personal experience. So for my last workshop, we did discuss like visions. Yes. I've had several dreams that have come to light, random ones, like I had a dog a couple years ago, and she hadn't gone in heat yet. And I was like kind of thinking about it for a few months, right? And then I had a dream one night that she started her period and she bled on my bed. The next day, she started her period and bled on my bed. So these things are quite normal, and visions have been around for all of humanity. So it is quite the thing that we even have religions built on it. And when we look at ideas of revelation and what's going on with the mass awakening, there's a lot of symbolism that even coexists what's going on right now in our society or our world and the time we're in right now. So there's a lot of in-depthness to dreams. So it can hold an individual meaning, but also a very large scale. I do believe in visions, and I don't think it necessarily has to be a dream. I think people can get a scope of it in meditation or whenever they're in this zone. Because when you go into these spaces, time does not exist, and you might actually be seeing something that's in the layers of timeline. We get a lot of these. A lot of people talk about New Earth. Ideas of the mass awakening. There's a lot of people expressing these dreams right now. And when I read them even online, just casually, I know based off of my own dreams on some of those topics, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot going on. So I do believe visions are quite a thing.
Interesting. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I bet you these are all the questions that people like want to ask and want to know about, dreams. Tell me about a client that really stands out in your mind where, you gave us one example of one that you've really been able to shift. Give me some other like really interesting examples of like how you were able to leverage dream analysis. And I would imagine that this really helps like even therapeutically, because it could be used as part of your healing or therapy, right? To really look into like if you, was it Freud or was it Carl Jung who were saying like you need to go and examine your dreams to really understand what's happening underneath. And then there was like all of this dream analysis that would happen to really help someone therapeutically. So how have you been able to shift people through your dream analysis and this interesting combination of like metaphysics and metaphoric?
Okay, so each person is different, and a lot of my clients are in different spaces. I have some people, a lot of them are some of them are awakening and some of them are already awakened. So I got a good mix of both. One client I will share some details on, he was struggling with demons a little bit. And it was to the point where it was manifesting physically in his life, and it was quite obvious there is something going on beyond himself. What it ended up turning out was I've worked with this a couple times with two people who have issues with, or one who had an issue, the other one's still working it out. But an idea that sometimes the ego or disconnected aspects of ourselves will look demonic or psychotic or just really out there. And it is so much so it feels disconnected, like it's not even a part of us. That's when I really like to dig deep and pull out the patterns and see a very large picture of what's going on. Because a lot of the times I've noticed that when you have an internal aspect that is broken or very seriously disconnected from your main self, it is vulnerable to the metaphysical aspects, and it does mirror. So it gets confusing to be like, is this a demon we're working with, or is it an internal aspect that is acting demonic? And it's to the point where they psychotically control the system and not allow intuition or other beliefs to come in and disrupt the system. The human mind and the ego is you have to feed it good information first off to support your intuition. If you do not, it will have imbalances. And this is usually where I see some more negative aspects metaphysically. And it can be confusing because like one time we had experience where the only hint that gave away that it wasn't an internal family system was, first off, the higher self said, this is not you, to the client. And I was like, okay, if your higher self is saying, hey man, this is not us, it's probably a good hint that it's not you. But another one was that it was, well, he was the same client. What really gave it away was the fact that his partner who was sleeping next to him had a shared dream of the demon terrorizing both of them at the same time. And they both woke up to the same experience and shared it. So that is not an internal aspect. Internal parts of your psychology do not do that. Yeah. I cannot sit here and say, hey, Chelsey, your little shitty demon in here, terrorize her. Yeah. No, I would physically be doing that to you out of my own demeanor and habits. It would not metaphysically happen. When it comes to the metaphysical stuff, it gets a bit eerie because I had another client where he was struggling it for a long time and he's still kind of new. But I basically told him he was hanging out in the ghetto of the astral realms. And I was like, no, seriously, you've been battling demons for so long that they're manifesting into your life and they're trying to harass you. And they were pretending to be his friend, turning lights on and off at his command. Fun, fun, fun. We thought it may be a ghost. I said, that's not a ghost comparing to the 20 years of experience you had prior to this. And it got really deep where it was something that manifested when he was a young child and followed through his adult life almost into his 40s. To the point where it kept getting more extreme and his dreams were getting very extreme. So like, he didn't realize the whole time that he was hanging out in the lower astral realms and he was battling and beating up the demons and causing more attention of a target to himself doing that. Which we learned so much going through the lower realms that I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, battle the demons, figure it out. Don't sit there and overdo it to where you're going to be buried alive by it. We do learn a lot, and we usually learn our resources in those spaces and carry it to the higher realms. That's why it's important, because when we get into dream analysis and the metaphorical or the metaphysical aspects, it's really important to realize where we exist as humans on the astral realms and how the other ones coexist with us. A lot of people, that would sound really crazy and not part of their reality until it starts to become the reality. What started it up with the client that had the 20-year experience struggle was Freddy Krueger, 7 years old. He was watching the movie with his father, and it was, fun, childlike, whatever. It's just a movie, right? Just a movie. It's not real. But he started actually having shadow people coming at him and grabbing his legs physically when he was a child and messing with him. Then when he was an adult, it backsided for a while and it wasn't an issue until it became a serious issue, and it manifested into his physical life where he was experiencing sleep paralysis, watching shadows walk around his room, and they were turning the lights on and off on him. Doesn't get more real than that. I don't think even at that time he realized how serious it was until we started talking, and I was like, they want to be your friend. And they were actually portraying themselves as his friends in his dreams. And when he refused to play or go along or realized it wasn't really his friends, that's when they started showing who they really were. So like when it comes to metaphysics, there's a lot of negativity and positivity. And that's why I said you're hanging out in the ghetto too much, because there's a very much brighter side to the astral realms, and the lower realms suck.
So how did you move him from the lower to the higher?
We're still in the process of doing that. I encourage spirituality and a connection to yourself. And I think it's important when you realize that you're in a situation where you're battling something on that level, you need to look inwards and see which internal part is connecting to it. That's where I'm at right now. I think there is an internal aspect or a broken internal part that has a law of attraction to it a little bit. So it's good to take it from a psychological aspect and a metaphysical. They usually mirror each other. So it's to sit here and be like, I'm being tormented by demons and I don't know why. Well, maybe it's your internal demon that you have not acknowledged that is seeking and getting that. And I don't want to say that ignorantly or like matter of factly, because I realize case by case can be different. But that's something I'm very much seeing is what's going on inside will reflect as a mirror metaphysically. And it is the law of attraction in its own complex way. So what I encourage people to do is to really dig deep, to do the healing. I'm not saying be spiritual, but I've noticed that embracing spirituality and having your place in that really makes it a very different experience.
So when you say embrace spirituality, are you referring to having a mindfulness practice, being present in the now, acceptance, non-judgment? Like what aspects are you referring to?
Ultimately, the whole 9 yards, but it's important to realize and to allow the space in your belief system and your reality that there are more things out there than yourself. And not everyone allows that in their reality. Something that I do when I do internal family system work is that the ego has very many layers of managers, firefighters, and whatnot, right? But ultimately, they're the ones who are controlling the belief system. And if they don't agree with what logically makes sense, they will deny it until it tears the system apart and it doesn't work. So it is an internal conflict. That's why I say your mind will literally battle itself. You have two wolves trying to eat each other until they both can see eye to eye. I think that is one example, but also it's the idea of realizing that we are spiritual beings. We are connected to these things, and ignorance makes you vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it's a hard one. But when you dive into dream analysis, you get a lot of the cool internal aspects. You get a lot of cool metaphysical too. And not everyone's fighting demons. And not a lot of my clients are. Some of them were, some of them weren't. Each person came in their own phase. Yeah. So that's why I say it's a vibration thing almost. And I know that's a weird concept. I just say embrace spirituality because I think it will be better for your vibration to be in a higher realm. Oh, if that makes sense to the listeners.
It makes 1,000 sense to me. If you think about it, right? Like we're energetic beings having a human experience. Like really, like we're all energy. Everything is energy. Even Einstein, right? Like going back to that connection to science, even Einstein said everything is energy, right? So, wow, this is so fascinating. I am loving this conversation. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get a little journal, and I think I'm going to really follow through with it this time. I'm going to put a pen and a little journal, and I'm going to try and just like jot down. I wonder, like, as you're talking, like, I wonder if like I almost don't want to look at my dreams. I don't know. Like maybe there's an aspect of me that doesn't even want to look at it, right? Like
it shows a lot.
It shows probably a lot, like the nonsense that I dream and the symbolism that comes through. This is absolutely fascinating. I feel like I want to do a part 2 with you because like I want to dig in.
Totally good.
I want to dig into kind of like the metaphorical because they're like all of these websites, right? They're like, if you drop an animal like X, it means Y, right? Like I don't know, turkey represents this, and I don't know, bird will, right? So like there's that element to it, which I think is like uber fascinating.
It's its own wormhole, yeah.
Right? It's like its own topic. And then there's this whole like, and we touched on the whole metaphysical realm and like what is the spiritual realm revealing to you through your dreams. So maybe I'll do a little bit of my own kind of like jotting down of my dreams, see what on earth comes up for me. And then I could be like, Chelsey, this is what I uncovered. This is what I've seen. I've seen birds. I've seen fish. My father actually does visit me. Yeah. Well, but you know what's really funny? I'm going to kind of finish it. Like now that you and I are talking, like my dad and my sister were like the best of friends. They were like so close, like on this physical plane. So the fact that he would go and visit her doesn't surprise me at all. And
she's easy to connect to.
And she's like uber, like she's like, well, blah, 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 right? So and so visits me all the time. Like,
I love that.
So
that sounds like me.
Totally that person. My sister will totally be like, and then she'll tell my mom that too. My mom's like, what? And or she'll be like, Grandma visited me, Mom, last night in my dream. And my mom's like, I never dream of her. Why doesn't she ever come to me?
I want her.
Or like if my mom will dream of her mom, my mom will be like, oh my God, my mom, I saw my mom. The dream was very vivid. And like she'll call me, she'll call my sister. Like it's like dreams are like that. They
It's a
definitely,
telephone.
yes,
Yeah,
they really awaken emotion in us. It's like you said in
they
the very
do.
beginning, right? It's like that emotional connection. So
Yeah.
anyways, I'm gonna start journaling this
Yeah.
situation and I'll see what I
Awesome.
remember. And then
Can I I
yeah,
want to
go
share a story real quick of my grandmother.
ahead.
Because I know it's a death and visiting with ancestors or family members.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, my grandmother was my soul sister. I was the closest grandchild out of 10 with her. I lived down the street. I was always there. Um, the night she died, I felt chills when she died, but I didn't realize she died until someone told me, and I was like, "Ooh, man, I was getting this weird vibe." But later that night in my dreams, well, before I was falling asleep, I felt like she was holding me and like kissed me. But I was like, that's an imagination thing, right? So I was like, okay, I love my grandmother. It was later in the dream where I met her in heaven, and it was the Golden Gates with white mist or clouds, right? We're in heaven, and it's the Golden Gate with nothing around it. And she was sitting there in the arches, holding her hands out, waiting for me. And I showed up and I was like, oh my God, Grandma, I love you so much. You died today. Like, I was freaking out a little bit. She just hugged me. She kissed me. And I remember holding her hand and walking her through the gates, and it went fuzzy after that. But it was very lucid, where I felt like I walked my grandmother into heaven. My grandfather on the other side of the family passed away a few nights ago, and it was like 11:30 when everyone was sending text messages about him passing, but I was already asleep, so I didn't get it till morning.
Yeah.
And I finally got the messages on Facebook. My aunt messaged me and goes, your grandfather passed away, by the way, in case you didn't know, because I don't have a phone right now. It's my
Yeah,
kid's
yeah.
birthday.
Yeah.
So I have a phone. So I didn't know that he had died. And I literally and it was weird because I didn't see him in my dreams. Someone came to me in my dreams to tell me my grandfather died. And that was about it. And the next day I go, someone came to tell me he died. I have no idea who or what or why, but I know he's dead. It was just the weirdest thing. There is so much going on. I've been practicing some psychic abilities a little bit, which I believe a lot of us do hold these things naturally with channeling and having an interconnection. It's just more or less having the space to know what's our voice and what belongs to something else beyond us.
Yeah.
Um, and there's so much going on that it's really not overly complicated. It's quite simple. And I think people just think they don't have what it takes, and they're underestimating themselves.
That's me. That's
Yeah.
me. I don't trust myself at all. Like, it's weird. Like people will say to me something like, "Oh, you're very intuitive," and I'm like, "What? Like, do we know the same person?" No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No. Or like someone would say to me, you have psychic abilities," and I'm like, "What? Who? Like, are we talking about the same person?" And then they're like, "Well, actually, everyone has psychic abilities, and not only that, but females tend to have
It
even
more.
greater, right?"
Yeah.
And so I met this like woman completely randomly. She ended up being a medium, and she's like, "Oh, I'm actually a medium." And I'm like, "Oh my God, that's amazing." Of course, like immediately
Hi.
everybody's like, "What can you tell about me?"
Is my dead aunt
Are you channeling anything? Right? So she wasn't channeling, she wasn't doing anything, but she's like, "You're very intuitive and you have psychic abilities." And I was like, are we talking about the same person? Because I don't. I'm like, no, not me. So I think you're 1,000% right. And I think that it's really
here?
interesting because you're touching on something that's, whether you look at it spiritually or whether you look at it like in the 3D realm, right? I think it goes back to our like confidence and self-trust, because I think lack of self-confidence is also lack of self-trust, not believing in yourself. And that was something that I actually always struggled with as well, like confidence and really stepping into my own power or whatever you want
Yeah.
to call it. And so like, I feel like maybe like in my everyday life, maybe in my career or things like that, I'm starting to trust myself more and listen to the decisions that I'm making. But when it comes to this, like, psychic abilities or intuitive hits or anything like that, I'm always like, is that the mind or is that the soul? Was that the mind or is that the soul? Is this a knowing or is this egoic? And
they're the same. They're so connected.
And I'm like, what's talking to me? What is like, so
yeah.
Anyway.
You're like, is that my internal voice or was that somebody else?
I'm like, and I'm always like, did it come from here? Did it come from here? Right. And then I'm like, okay, and then I'm like, is there a definition for like how you would know what?
You're overthinking it. You gotta, it's a trust thing. And like, okay, so something that I work with when it comes to intuitive approaches, especially with dreaming and like adding meditation into it, people always say, well, I'm bad at meditation. I have a hard time keeping my mind silent. Whatever you know about meditation, get it out the door. There is a million ways to meditate, first off. And don't let someone tell you you have to do it one way. Daydreaming is meditating. Letting your imagination go is meditating. Dealing with your internal work and your emotions is meditating. Keeping the slate clean and allowing the energy to come in is still meditating. It's all meditating. And the one thing I love the most is the imagination, because I think it's underplayed in a way that it's child's play. And I think the imagination is huge. It creates ideas of allowing astral projection, allowing remote viewing, allowing seeing beyond the veil. It is all day your inner child. And it comes to internal work. So when I look at the internal family system, each one has its value and its role. So I know when I was doing dream analysis on myself and working through some of my own stuff, my inner child was a big one. And my inner child, gosh, she's rough. So when I was a kid, I used to sit in closets and hide and cry and find my private space in closets. And I realized even now at the age of 34, my inner child was still doing the same thing, but in my dreams. And every time I tried to open a door, go to a space, it was like someone was shutting me out, pushing me out. But it wasn't just a push out. I was exploring my mechanics through imagination while I was sleeping, and I realized I was releasing DMT on myself while I was sleeping. But I wasn't doing it intentionally. It was this idea that my inner child was doing it to push me away. Because growing up, I would have felt not heard, not seen by a lot of the people around me. But at the end of the day, now it was me as an adult not seeing or not recognizing my inner child and bringing her up. So I was doing exactly what everyone else was doing to her as an adult, even now. So I went through a long process of several months of trying to figure out this mystery of what's going on. What is this DMT release that's warping my reality and pushing me out the door and slamming it? It was my inner child. And I realized I had a lot to do with my third eye chakra and really kind of phasing in. So when I do a lot of, like, I have a book and my own shadow work, and I realized it was all progressing in the phases of chakra lessons. So the inner child is very huge for me, and it's internal family work, but it wasn't metaphysical. It was all me, but it was still very strong that she still is alive. She still exists. No matter how much we try to smother parts of ourselves, they're going to find their voice. But it was a huge one for me because I realized, like, even going through the phases I am in my spirituality, my guides work with me very heavily in my sleep. I have, like, at this point, like, as a weird example, probably since the holidays of last year, I've been having dreams where my guides are putting their hands over my eyes and telling me to use my third eye. And they're like telling me I have to use my third eye. And I was already through my inner child work a little bit at one point, but it was getting more aggressive. And like, even still after I opened up the inner child, realized that she was doing all the weird stuff and figured out her tricks and brought her to wholeness, I was still having my guides put their hands over my eyes and tell me I have to use my third eye. So I sometimes while I sleep, I am literally staring at my ceiling while my eyes are closed. I am not the only person who is having these experiences. I know 5 other people who have shared their dream states with me and told me that they have experiences where they're using their third eye while they're asleep and they can see their room or the alarm clock while their eyes are closed. And they'll open or waken up from the state and see that it was the exact time. It gets very confusing on if you're awake or asleep a little bit because like they know they're dreaming, but
Yeah.
they're seeing the room around them and how it is currently in the state. We have so much untapped potential and special abilities and aspects of our own humanity that are deeply woven into the mass collective shadows.
Well,
and it's time, it's coming out.
right. And, I think that on a personal development front, right? Like, one of the things that I think we tend to do is we tend to perceive ourselves as being really small and limited.
Yes.
Right. And we believe we create beliefs around these limitations. Right. And that's why we tend to make the choices in life that we tend to make, because we come from a very limited belief state of being. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of the awakening journey is you remembering who you are and that you are unlimited. You are unlimited. You are powerful. We are so powerful. We're unlimited. And as long as you can, what is it? If you can imagine it, it exists. Otherwise you wouldn't have imagined it. You wouldn't have had the desire for it, right?
To create it within your own reality.
To create it within your reality. And you have the power to create it within your reality only if you believe and you tap into that power, right? And and that does mean you tapping into your subconscious. You have to, right? Whether it's Neville Goddard, whether it's Joe Dispenza, it's everybody speaks to this, right? It's just so fundamental to like how we function. So anyways, Chelsey, tell me, I've totally neglected to ask you, how and where can people find you? How can they learn more about you? How can they start doing their dream analysis with you? I mean, you're just like fascinating.
Okay, so I do have a website. It's chelseyturpeningcoxsey.com, which I can text it to you here later to share.
And I will include it in the notes. Yes.
Yeah. And I am very active on Facebook and it's open to the public. So you can follow my dream analysis page or my personal page. Honestly, at this point, it doesn't matter because I'm speaking about it on all of the platforms. They're both professional. But so I do workshops once or twice a month. I do a Sunday morning and a Monday evening. Try to get some nationalities because I have a lot of people around the world I'm working with a tad bit. So I do enjoy the cultural influences of dream analysis and spirituality. They each are quite different and I enjoy just tapping into it. Workshops are great. They're $10 to join. They're good to take tools home for self-work on your own. If you're not able to do a one-on-one, that's kind of why I was doing the workshops, to build a community and have people just support each other and explore with a 90-minute workshop. But I also do 90-minute one-on-one sessions, which those are like some serious stakes. We do a lot of work in the one-on-ones. And I also set time in outside of the one-on-one to continue investigating. So it's like a whole process where I'm hearing it in a 90-minute conversation, then I'm analyzing it in written form and really trying to dig deep into internal aspects of patterns, as well as trying to help with the metaphysics, and I allow conversation in between the weeks. So I'm not like a strict mental health person that's like, oh, you can't talk to me after sessions or blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm extremely chatty and I'm always available to talk. So you can always find me on Facebook or email or my website. I am.
Or workshops or
all over workshops.
Some people might opt for a private one-on-one because they don't feel comfortable revealing like the depths of their like beingness.
The weird, right? What they feel is weird, or
Exactly. So, oh my God, this is amazing. So I will make sure to include all of the things that you mentioned, and Facebook, your website, ways people can find you, reach you, in the notes below. This has been so fascinating. I know I learned a ton personally, like on a very personal level. I learned a ton, and you're just absolutely incredible. Keep going, keep doing what you're doing. The world needs you. I think people, there's so many people struggling, and, everyone processes, whether it's trauma or emotions, in very different ways, right? And whatever path, whether it is therapy, dream analysis, therapy and dream analysis and spirituality, like whatever modality helps, like what could be better than that? Right? Like, so find the path that works for you, find the path that brings you peace. And when I say joy and love, I don't mean it in the sense of like, oh, I won $1 million, therefore I'm happy, but like true inner peace, true inner
peace,
contentment.
I don't think a lot of people know where to start, and it gets confusing at the beginning, but whatever catches your attention, go with that.
Yeah. And a lot of times it will lead you to all of the modalities, right? You might start in one place and then you might continue. Like I said, at the beginning of my journey, when I was like, what is going on? I read a lot about like people were recommending to jot down your dreams because it could be revealing things to you. And I was just like, okay, this is too hard. Or like, I don't know if this is going to.
This is not your thing. Yeah.
It wasn't in the beginning, but I feel like I'm coming out of all the stuff. So maybe I'm like more willing to give this a shot.
Aligning now. It's overwhelming. You cannot do a million things at once. At the end of the day, we are mind, body, and soul. And that's quite complicated when we're trying to get the tier going in a healthy way. Like one thing at a time.
Exactly. So anyways, I so enjoyed meeting you and so enjoyed learning from you. You're just like a wealth of information.
Thank you. I feel like at Google sometimes.
That's a good thing. That's an amazing thing. So it's awesome. Thank you. Honestly, I mean that very genuinely. And maybe we will be doing a part 2 and digging into.
Yeah, let me know. There's so much more we could explore. So this is fun. That hour went fast. We'll do another one.
All right. Have an amazing rest of your evening. Thank you again. I so appreciate your time, and I appreciate just the insight and the energy with which you shared everything. Yeah. So thank you.
I hope you sleep well.
Although that story, I'm like, I hope no demons.
I hope you see your dad.
He just never loved me. He'll never visit me.
He'll be like, don't tell me who your favorite is.
Well, we always knew who the favorite was. Dead or alive.
No.
Anyway, have a great night.
Have a great night. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right, bye.